The studio lights were bright, the audience buzzing with excitement. Cameras rolled across the stage as the host prepared to introduce one of the most famous athletes in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Muhammad Ali. The crowd erupted into applause as Muhammad Ali walked onto the stage with his signature confidence. He waved to the audience, smiling calmly as he took his seat across from the host. Ali was already a global icon by then, a heavyweight champion, a cultural symbol, and a man known for speaking his mind. Wherever he went, attention followed. But tonight, something about the atmosphere felt different. The host leaned back in his chair, studying Ali with a thin smile. At first, it seemed like a normal interview. The audience expected jokes, stories, maybe a few playful insults. Ali was famous for those moments. But the host had something else in mind. He tapped his pen on the desk and looked at Ali with a smirk. "So you really believe you're the greatest, huh?" The audience laughed lightly. Ali smiled back, clearly used to questions like that. "I don't believe it," Ali replied calmly. "I know it." More laughter filled the room, but the host didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice sharper now. "You know, a lot of people watching tonight don't see you that way." The room grew quieter. Ali's expression stayed relaxed, but his eyes sharpened slightly. The host continued. "Some people think you talk too much. Some say you're arrogant. And others," he paused for a moment, glancing toward the audience, "say you're not exactly the kind of man who should represent America." A few uncomfortable murmurs spread across the studio. The comment hung in the air. Everyone felt it. The tone had shifted. The camera zoomed closer to Ali's face, waiting for his reaction. Was he going to get angry? Would the champion lose his temper on live television? For a moment, Ali said nothing. He simply looked at the host. Then he slowly leaned toward the microphone, a calm smile forming on his face. The audience leaned forward in their seats, because everyone in that studio could feel it. Whatever Muhammad Ali was about to say next was going to change the entire interview. The studio audience could still feel the tension from the host's comment. What started as a normal late-night interview had suddenly turned into something much heavier. Across the desk sat Muhammad Ali, one of the most famous athletes on the planet. By that time, Ali was more than just a boxing champion. He was a global symbol of confidence, courage, and pride. Millions admired him not only for his fights inside the ring, but also for the way he spoke his mind outside of it. Ali had spent years proving himself. He had defeated some of the greatest fighters in boxing history. He had stood up for his beliefs even when it cost him titles, money, and public support. Whether people loved him or hated him, they could never ignore him, and that was exactly why television producers loved inviting him to their shows. Ali brought ratings, he brought energy, and most of all, he brought unforgettable moments. But the host sitting across from him tonight had a reputation of his own. He was known for being sharp, sarcastic, and sometimes deliberately provocative. Many viewers enjoyed watching him challenge celebrities and push them into uncomfortable situations. Some guests laughed it off. Others struggled to keep their composure. The host seemed to believe that putting powerful or famous people on the spot made great television. And tonight, his target was Muhammad Ali. At first, the conversation had started normally. The host asked about Ali's recent fights, his training routine, and his famous claim of being the greatest. The audience laughed when Ali playfully bragged about his speed and power. He even shadowboxed for a moment, throwing a few quick punches in the air that made the crowd cheer. For a brief moment, it felt like the interview would be entertaining and lighthearted, but then the tone shifted. The host leaned back in his chair and folded his arms, watching Ali closely. There was a different expression on his face now, less playful, more challenging. "You've built quite a reputation for yourself," he said slowly. Ali nodded calmly. "That's right. But not everyone likes that reputation," the host continued. "Some people say you talk too much, that you're loud, arrogant, and always trying to draw attention to yourself." A few nervous laughs came from the audience. Ali didn't react right away. Instead, he simply looked at the host with a steady expression. The host wasn't finished. "And then there are people," he added, lowering his voice slightly, "who think someone like you shouldn't be the face of American sports." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some people glanced at each other. Others stared straight at Ali, waiting to see what he would do, because everyone understood what the host was hinting at. The words were carefully chosen, but the message was clear enough to make the room uneasy. For a moment, the studio felt strangely quiet. The bright lights, the cameras, the audience, everything seemed to freeze in place. Most guests in that situation might have reacted emotionally. Some might have shouted back. Others might have tried to laugh it off and change the subject. But Muhammad Ali was not like most guests. Instead of showing anger, he slowly leaned back in his chair. His expression remained calm, his eyes focused directly on the host. And then, after a brief pause that felt longer than it really was, Ali leaned slightly closer to the microphone. The audience held their breath, because everyone in the studio knew something important was about to happen. And whatever Muhammad Ali said next would either calm the tension or make the entire room explode. For several long seconds, the studio stayed completely silent. All eyes were on Muhammad Ali. The camera zoomed closer to his face, capturing every detail of his reaction. The producers behind the scenes watched nervously from the control room, unsure of what was about to happen. The host sat comfortably in his chair, leaning back as if he had just set a trap, and now he was waiting to see how Ali would respond. Most people in that situation would have reacted immediately. Some would have raised their voice, others might have stormed off the stage, but Ali didn't do any of that. Instead, he simply looked at the host for a moment longer. Then he smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile. It wasn't angry either. It was calm, almost patient. Ali leaned forward slightly and rested his hands on the desk. "You know something," he said slowly, his voice steady. "People been saying things about me my whole life." A few members of the audience nodded quietly. Ali continued. "When I was young, they said I was too loud." He shrugged lightly. "When I started winning fights, they said I was too proud." The audience listened closely now. "And when I told the world I was the greatest, they said I was crazy." A few soft laughs spread through the crowd. The host gave a small smirk, but he still looked confident. He tapped his pen against the desk again. "But that's not really what I'm talking about," the host said. Ali tilted his head slightly. "Oh," he replied. The host leaned forward now, lowering his voice so the words felt heavier. "I'm talking about something else," he said. The audience shifted in their seats again. The host glanced toward the crowd before turning back to Ali. "You see," he continued, "there are people watching tonight who believe that sports heroes should represent certain values." Ali listened without interrupting. "And some of those viewers," the host added carefully, "don't believe someone like you fits that picture." A murmur ran through the audience. Even though the host never used any direct insults, the meaning behind his words was impossible to ignore. The tension in the studio became thicker. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others leaned forward, sensing that the interview had just crossed an invisible line. Ali noticed the reaction around him, but he didn't lose his composure. Instead, he folded his hands together and looked straight at the host. "Let me ask you a question," Ali said calmly. The host raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Ali paused for a second. "Why did you invite me here tonight?" The question caught the host slightly off guard. "Well," he replied, forcing a small laugh, "you're famous. People like watching you." Ali nodded slowly. "That's true." The audience chuckled lightly. "But if you think I talk too much, if you think I'm arrogant, if you think I'm not the kind of man who should represent America." Ali leaned closer to the microphone. "Then why invite me at all?" The room went quiet again. The host shifted in his chair. For the first time since the interview began, his confident expression flickered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Oh, I respect fighters," he said. Ali raised an eyebrow. "Just fighters." The audience reacted with soft laughter. The host tried to maintain control of the conversation. "I respect talent," he clarified. "But sometimes I wonder about the man behind all the talking." The comment hung in the air. The audience waited. Ali slowly leaned back in his chair again. He studied the host for a moment, as if carefully considering his next words. Then he nodded slightly. "All right," Ali said. His voice was still calm, but something about his tone had changed. The audience felt it immediately. Ali leaned forward one more time. This time, his eyes were locked directly on the host. "You want to talk about the man behind the talking?" The studio was completely silent. Ali paused. Then he spoke again, and the words he was about to say were about to turn the entire interview upside down. The studio felt heavier than before. No one moved. The cameras were locked on Muhammad Ali, and the audience sat frozen in their seats, waiting for what would happen next. Ali leaned slightly toward the microphone, his posture relaxed but his presence filling the entire room. "You want to talk about the man behind the talking?" he repeated calmly. The host tried to maintain his confident smile, but the tension in the room had shifted. This was no longer a playful interview. Ali continued. "You say some people don't think I represent America," he said. The audience listened closely. "Well, let me tell you something." Ali pointed gently toward himself. "I was born in America." A few people in the audience nodded. "I trained in America." Another pause, and every time I stepped into that ring I fought for America. The room remained silent. Ali wasn't shouting. He wasn't angry. but every word landed with weight. The host leaned back slightly, folding his arms again as if trying to regain control. But that's not really the issue, he said. Ali looked at him calmly.
Oh.
The host cleared his throat. Some people believe a sports hero should be humble, he said. Quiet. Grateful. A few nervous laughs came from the audience.
Ochu,
the host continued. You call yourself the greatest every chance you get. Ali smiled again.
That's right, he said. The host raised an eyebrow, so you admit it?
Ali nodded. I do. The audience waited for more. Ali leaned forward slightly. But let me explain something. His voice was calm but confident. When I say I'm the greatest, I'm not putting anyone else down. The audience listened carefully. I'm reminding young people watching that they can believe in themselves too. The crowd reacted with a small ripple of applause. The host tried to interrupt. But some people think. Ali raised a hand gently. Let me finish. The audience clapped louder. The host stopped speaking. Ali continued. You see, for a long time in this country, he said slowly, people who looked like me were told they were nothing. The room grew quiet again. They were told to stay quiet. Ali paused. To stay humble. Another pause. To never say they were great. The tension in the room deepened. Ali looked directly into the camera for a moment, as if speaking to millions of viewers at home. But I decided something when I was young, he continued. I decided nobody else was going to define my worth. The audience broke into applause. The host shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ali wasn't finished yet. So when I say I'm the greatest, he said calmly, I'm not just talking about boxing. He leaned closer to the microphone. I'm talking about believing in yourself, even when the world tells you not to. The applause grew louder. Some members of the audience even stood up. The host forced a small smile, trying to appear relaxed. Well, he said, that's a very inspiring speech. But his voice lacked the confidence it had earlier. Ali noticed. He smiled slightly. You invited me here to talk, Ali said. So I'm talking. The audience laughed. The host tried to regain control again. But some critics would still say you enjoy attention a little too much. Ali shrugged lightly. Maybe. The crowd chuckled, but attention isn't the problem, Ali added. What's the problem then? The host asked quickly. Ali paused. The studio went quiet again. He looked directly at the host. The problem, Ali said slowly, is when someone tries to tear another person down just to feel powerful. The audience reacted with a mix of gasps and applause. The words clearly struck a nerve. For the first time during the entire interview, the host had no quick response. Ali leaned back calmly in his chair. The tension in the room had completely shifted. Just minutes earlier, the host had tried to embarrass Muhammad Ali in front of millions of viewers. But now, it felt like the entire conversation had turned against him. And the most powerful moment of the night was still coming. The studio was no longer the same as it had been at the start of the interview. Just a few minutes earlier, the host had seemed completely in control. His questions were sharp, his tone confident, and he clearly expected to push Muhammad Ali into an uncomfortable corner. But now the atmosphere had changed. The audience was fully on Ali's side. People were leaning forward in their seats, waiting for what he would say next. The host adjusted his tie and forced a small smile. Well, he said, trying to sound casual, you certainly know how to turn an interview into a speech. A few scattered laughs came from the crowd. Ali smiled calmly. I'm just answering your questions, he replied. The host nodded, but the confidence he had earlier was fading. So let me ask you directly. The host continued. Are you saying people criticize you because they're uncomfortable with your confidence? Ali tilted his head slightly. I'm saying something very simple, he replied. The room became quiet again. Ali leaned forward toward the microphone. When a man believes in himself, some people admire it, but others feel threatened by it. The audience murmured in agreement. The host folded his arms. Threaten, he repeated. Ali nodded. Yes. He looked calmly at the host before continuing. You see, when I started saying I was the greatest, a lot of people thought it was just bragging. A few smiles appeared in the audience. But I wasn't just bragging. Ali continued. I was speaking confidence into existence. The crowd responded with applause. Ali raised his hand slightly, acknowledging them before speaking again. Because for a long time, he said, people who looked like me were told they shouldn't be confident. The room grew quieter. They were told to stay in the background. Another pause, to stay quiet. The host shifted in his chair again. Ali continued calmly, but I refused to do that. His voice remained steady. I refused to let anyone tell me I wasn't great. The audience clapped again, louder this time. The host quickly leaned forward. So you're turning this into a race issue now? He asked. A few people in the audience gasped at the bluntness of the question. But Ali didn't look surprised. Instead, he gave a small smile. "I didn't turn it into anything," he replied calmly. "You brought it there." The audience erupted with laughter and applause. The host's smile tightened. Ali leaned forward again. "You said some people don't believe someone like me should represent America." The room became quiet again. Ali spoke slowly and clearly. "So let's talk about that." He placed his hands calmly on the desk. "I'm an American." The audience nodded. "I grew up here." Another pause. "I trained here?" Ali looked toward the crowd. "And every time I stepped into the ring, I carried this country's name with me." The applause began building again. "But when I say I'm proud," Ali continued, "some people don't like it." He shrugged lightly. "And that says more about them than it does about me." The audience erupted again. The host opened his mouth to respond, but Ali continued before he could interrupt. "You tried to make me look arrogant tonight," Ali said calmly. The room fell silent again. "But confidence isn't arrogance." He leaned closer to the microphone. "Confidence is knowing who you are." The crowd clapped loudly. "And I know exactly who I am." For a moment, the host had nothing to say. He sat there quietly, staring across the desk. Ali leaned back in his chair, relaxed again. The audience continued applauding. Some people even stood up. The energy in the studio had completely flipped. The host had tried to embarrass Muhammad Ali in front of millions of viewers. But instead, Ali had turned the entire moment into a powerful lesson. And the interview wasn't over yet. The energy in the studio had shifted completely. The confident, teasing host who had begun the evening trying to humiliate Muhammad Ali now sat almost defensively in his chair. The audience, once murmuring nervously at the host's comments, was now firmly on Ali's side. Every eye in the room was on him, waiting for the next word. Ali didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm confidence filled the space more than any shout ever could. He leaned slightly forward, resting his forearms on the desk, and looked directly at the host. "So," Ali said, his voice steady and precise, "you tried to make me look small tonight." The host forced a smile. I didn't mean." Ali raised a hand gently. "No, you meant exactly what you said, and that's exactly the problem." A hush fell over the studio. Ali's words carried weight beyond the microphones and cameras. The audience understood what he meant. Some people try to tear others down not because of who they are, but because it makes them feel powerful. "You see," Ali continued, "there's a difference between confidence and arrogance. Some people confuse the two because they've never had to be confident themselves." The host opened his mouth again, but Ali spoke before he could finish. "And that's the moment you realize," Ali said, smiling faintly, "that it isn't about me at all. It's about what kind of person you are when you try to belittle someone else." There was a ripple of applause from the audience, but it was more than just appreciation. It was admiration. Everyone in that room, from the camera operators to the audience members, could feel the lesson Ali was imparting without even raising his voice. The host shifted in his seat, uncomfortable now, realizing that he was no longer in control. Ali leaned back slightly, folding his arms in a relaxed, almost casual manner. "You asked me questions to provoke a reaction," Ali said. "You tried to embarrass me on live television, but all you did was show the world who you really are." A murmur of agreement swept through the audience. Cameras captured every angle, every glance. Even the crew behind the scenes watched in silent awe. Ali's eyes softened as he addressed the viewers at home through the camera lens. "You see, confidence and pride aren't things to hide. They aren't things to apologize for. They are things to own, and when someone tries to bring you down, it doesn't define you. It defines them." The host swallowed nervously. The smirk he had worn earlier was gone. He had tried to assert authority, but Ali had flipped the script entirely. Ali's final words landed like a punch, but one that healed rather than hurt. "I came here tonight to talk about my life, my experiences, and my perspective. And if anyone thinks they can humiliate me, that's fine, because the truth always speaks louder than arrogance or insults." The audience erupted in applause, some standing, some cheering, all fully aware that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Ali didn't raise his voice, didn't yell, didn't need to. The power of his words, delivered with calm precision, had completely turned the situation on its head. The host's expression was a mixture of disbelief and respect. Ali had not just defended himself, he had educated the entire studio and audience in a matter of minutes. And in that moment, it was clear who the real champion was, not just in the ring, but in life. Muhammad Ali had proven once again that strength isn't measured by fists alone. True power lies in composure, dignity, and the ability to rise above hatred without lowering yourself to it. As Ali leaned back, the audience continued clapping. Cameras captured every detail, and even the host, humbled and quiet, had no choice but to recognize the lesson he had just received. That night, the studio didn't just see a champion boxer. They saw a man whose courage, intelligence, and integrity were unmatched. And everyone present knew that Ali's words would resonate far beyond that room, far beyond the cameras, and far beyond the television broadcast. It was more than an interview. It was a masterclass in respect, confidence, and the quiet but unstoppable force of character. The applause in the studio slowly faded, but the energy remained electric. Every person present knew they had witnessed more than just an interview. They had watched Muhammad Ali turn an attempt at humiliation into a powerful lesson in dignity, confidence, and respect. Ali leaned back in his chair, calm as ever, letting the silence speak as loudly as his words had moments before. The cameras continued rolling, capturing the moment for the millions of viewers at home who would later replay it again and again. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to shout or retaliate. The power of his presence, the clarity of his words, and the quiet authority he carried said it all. He had proved, once more, that true strength doesn't come from aggression or insults. It comes from composure, self-belief, and integrity. The host, who had arrived expecting to humiliate a famous athlete, now sat silently humbled. He realized that he had misjudged Ali, not just as a boxer, but as a man. The attempt to embarrass someone had backfired completely. In trying to assert power over Ali, the host had revealed his own insecurity. Ali glanced around the studio, his eyes landing briefly on the production crew, the staff, and the audience. Each person had witnessed the lesson firsthand. Respect isn't earned by fame, by force, or by trying to humiliate others. It is shown through understanding, kindness, and the way you treat people, even when they can't benefit you. He leaned toward the microphone one last time. Remember this, Ali said softly but firmly. Respect isn't something you give to the rich. It isn't something you give because someone is famous or powerful. Respect is something you give because it's the right thing to do, especially when no one is watching. The audience leaned forward in agreement, some whispering to each other, some nodding with awe. Ali's words weren't just for the host, they were for everyone watching, at home and in the studio. They carried the weight of his life experiences, the battles he had fought inside and outside the ring, and the wisdom of someone who had seen both triumph and prejudice firsthand. Ali smiled faintly, a signature smile that had once captivated crowds and silenced opponents. One day, he continued, the person you look down on may be the very person you end up respecting the most, and if you've treated them with arrogance or scorn, that moment will be a lesson in humility for you. The host looked down, quiet and reflective. Ali didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate victory over the host. His triumph was silent, rooted in the power of character and truth. The studio cameras captured the final moments as Ali stood and waved to the audience. The applause rose again, louder this time, not just for his fame, but for his courage, his composure, and the lesson he had imparted. People would remember this night not for the host's words, but for Ali's. As he left the studio, he offered one final thought to the audience, as if speaking directly to every person watching. True power is silent. True respect is earned. And humility is the greatest strength of all. Type ALI in the comments if you believe in confidence, dignity, and respect. And tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment. That night, the world didn't just see Muhammad Ali the boxer. They saw Muhammad Ali the man, fearless, dignified, and unshakable. His words echoed far beyond the studio walls, leaving a lasting message. Real strength is measured not by the power to hurt, but by the ability to rise above hate and lead with integrity. The lesson was clear. The studio would never forget it. And neither would the millions of viewers who witnessed a masterclass in courage, humility, and respect, the kind of power that no punch could ever match.